If you've ever wondered, why did my blood pressure jump even though I didn't feel stressed? You're not alone. That confusion is the warning sign. And today, we're going to talk about the one habit that makes those spikes far more likely as we age. Here's the first thing you need to know right away. It's not food, it's not salt, and it's not even stress in the way most people think about stress. It's something you do. Something that often happens during the measurement itself or in the moments right before or after you check your numbers. That's why this feels so confusing. You can be sitting at home, calm, comfortable, doing nothing strenuous, and still watch your blood pressure climb into a range that scares you. I've seen this again and again in people who swear they weren't anxious at all. The problem is that your body doesn't wait for you to feel stressed before it reacts. As we age, the connection between the brain and the blood vessels becomes more sensitive and more automatic. A routine you repeat every day, something that feels responsible and health-conscious, can quietly train your nervous system to raise your blood pressure on command. Doctors encourage this habit. Families praise it. And yet physiologically, it can keep your vessels tense, your heart working harder, and your readings unpredictable, especially at home. That's why people feel blindsided. They take their medication, they follow instructions, they try to do everything right, but the numbers still jump, often higher each time they look. And those jumps aren't random. They're learned responses. The good news is this. Once you understand what's actually driving those spikes, the fear starts to dissolve. By the end of this video, you won't feel scared of your blood pressure monitor anymore. You'll understand how to use it without triggering the very problem you're trying to prevent. Most people assume that when blood pressure goes up, something physical must be wrong. A clogged artery, a weak heart, medication failing. But what's really happening in many cases starts much higher up in the brain. Your blood pressure is not a fixed setting. It's a moment-to-moment response system, constantly adjusted by your nervous system based on what it expects is about to happen. As we get older, this system becomes faster and more reactive, not slower. The brain becomes more protective. The moment it anticipates a threat, even a subtle one, it sends signals that tighten blood vessels and increase pressure. And here's the part almost no one is told. Anticipation alone is enough. You don't need panic. You don't need racing thoughts. You don't even need to feel worried. Simply preparing for something your brain associates with danger can trigger the response automatically. This is why blood pressure can rise before you move, before you speak, before anything stressful occurs. The body is preparing in advance. In younger years, that response fades quickly. With age, it lingers. Over time, the brain begins to learn these moments, remembering what usually comes next and reacting sooner each time. When a well-intentioned daily habit quietly teaches the brain to expect a certain outcome, the pressure increase becomes predictable, repeatable, and very real. And if you're listening closely, you may already recognize exactly which habit that is. As we get older, the body becomes more sensitive to signals from the brain, especially the ones tied to safety and threat. What used to be a mild reaction in your 40s can turn into a sharp spike in your 60s or 70s, even when nothing around you has actually changed. The heart listens more closely, the blood vessels react faster, and small triggers produce bigger responses. This is why many seniors feel blindsided when their blood pressure suddenly jumps for no reason. It's not that your heart is failing or your medication stopped working overnight. It's that the system controlling pressure has become more reactive with age. And one repeated habit, usually done while looking for reassurance from a number, quietly trains it to overreact. The more often that habit happens, the faster the body responds next time. Until one day, the spike starts the moment you reach for the cuff. Most people never realize the moment this pattern locks in because it feels responsible, even smart. You're not doing anything reckless. You're not ignoring your health. In fact, you're trying to stay ahead of a problem. You're trying to catch something early, to protect yourself, to make sure nothing bad sneaks up on you. But the body doesn't interpret intentions. It responds to patterns. When the same action happens at the same time, in the same setting, day after day, the brain begins to anticipate what comes next. It prepares the body before anything actually happens. The heart rate lifts slightly. The blood vessels tighten just a bit. Hormones that are meant for emergencies start to appear for a moment, then longer, then faster each time. What started as a simple check becomes a trigger. And the most unsettling part is this. The response doesn't wait for the measurement anymore. It begins before the cuff tightens, before the screen lights up, before you've even had a chance to feel calm. The body moves first, automatically, without permission. And that's when people realize the spike isn't something they can relax away, because it's already happening. Once this response becomes automatic, it starts to feel unpredictable, even unfair, because you're no longer doing anything differently on the surface. You sit the same way. You breathe the same way. You tell yourself you're calm. But the body isn't listening anymore. It's reacting to a learned signal, not to your thoughts in that moment. This is why so many seniors say, "I wasn't stressed," when their numbers suddenly jump. They're telling the truth. Stress is no longer required once the pattern is trained. For many seniors, this loop is created by checking blood pressure at home too frequently, especially in the same place and at the same time each day. The nervous system has already decided that this moment matters, that it needs to prepare, that it can't wait to see the outcome. And here's the part most people never hear. Every repeat strengthens that loop. The brain doesn't get desensitized by repetition. It gets faster. What once caused a mild rise now creates a sharper spike, and what used to fade in minutes can linger for hours. Over time, the body stops distinguishing between a real threat and a routine reading. The reaction becomes the default, not the exception. And when that happens, it no longer feels like something you are doing wrong. It feels like something that is happening to you, even though the trigger is still quietly being reinforced. What makes this habit so powerful is that it's extreme. It is that it feels harmless. This pattern often forms in people who check their blood pressure at home repeatedly, especially in the same place and at the same time each day. No one warned you that the body doesn't just record the numbers on the screen. It records the moment around them. The chair, the room, the silence, the pause before the result appears, all of it becomes part of the signal. Over time, the brain stops waiting for the reading and starts reacting to the setup itself. This is why blood pressure can begin to rise before the cuff even tightens, before the monitor finishes cycling, before you consciously feel anxious at all. The nervous system is simply doing what it was trained to do: prepare early. As this pattern repeats, the baseline begins to shift. What once felt like a temporary spike starts to feel like my new normal, even though nothing structural has changed in the heart or vessels. This is where people get trapped, believing their condition is worsening, when in reality, their nervous system is stuck in a loop it learned through repetition. And the longer that loop runs, the more convincing it becomes, because the readings are real, even if the cause isn't what they think it is. The most important thing to understand now is that this loop is reversible, and it doesn't require willpower, medication changes, or forcing yourself to stay calm. Once the body has learned a pattern, the way out is not resistance, it's interruption. The nervous system can't stay on high alert without reinforcement, and when the reinforcement stops, the response weakens on its own. For many people, interruption begins by changing how often and where they check their blood pressure, instead of measuring it the same way, in the same place, every day. This is where many seniors get it wrong, trying to relax harder, breathe deeper, or mentally argue with the numbers on the screen. That effort actually keeps the loop alive, because it keeps attention locked on the outcome. What the body needs instead is predictability without urgency, space without monitoring, and time without repeated confirmation. When that happens, the brain gradually stops flagging the moment as dangerous. The response softens. The spikes lose their edge, and what once felt automatic begins to feel optional again. Not because you forced control, but because the body no longer feels like it needs to take it from you. At this point, the most important thing to understand is that your body is not broken and your blood pressure is not suddenly out of control. It is responding exactly the way a nervous system responds when it has learned a repeated pattern. And for many seniors, that pattern forms around the act of checking itself in the same place, at the same time, following the same routine day after day. So the brain stops waiting for logic and begins reacting to what it has been taught to expect, which is why the response can start before the cuff tightens, before the numbers appear, and sometimes even before you consciously realize you are tense, making these spikes feel sudden and unfair, even though nothing else has changed. Not because your heart is failing or your medication stopped working, but because a conditioned response is firing automatically. And the critical shift is realizing this is not danger, but familiarity. Because once you see the spike as a learned signal instead of a threat, you open the door to interrupting it, softening it, and retraining the response rather than fearing the monitor itself. Improvement begins when you stop chasing reassurance and start supporting regulation. Blood pressure becomes unstable when every reading feels like an emergency instead of information. Many seniors get stuck because they check their numbers to feel safe, not realizing the body is learning that pattern. Over time, the nervous system starts reacting before the cuff even tightens. Real progress starts when monitoring is approached calmly, with space and intention, not urgency. That shift alone changes how the body responds because you're no longer fighting it, you're guiding it. This is where everything slows down. Because nothing needs to be forced anymore. Your body is not broken. It has simply learned a pattern. And learned patterns can be unlearned, especially when pressure and urgency are removed, allowing the nervous system to remember how to settle on its own. So with time and calm, consistency, your readings begin to reflect your true state rather than a moment of fear. And most importantly, this is reassurance, not instruction, because you're okay. And your body is capable of feeling safe again. Once this understanding settles in, something important changes internally because you stop interpreting every high reading as a personal failure or a medical emergency, and instead begin seeing it as feedback from a system that is learning again, which is critical because blood pressure in older adults is deeply influenced by expectation, memory, and routine, meaning the body often responds not to danger itself, but to what it believes is about to happen. And when that belief softens, the spikes soften with it, allowing readings to normalize naturally over time rather than swinging unpredictably. Which is why many people are surprised to see better numbers, not because they tried harder, but because they finally stopped bracing themselves before every measurement. It is also important to understand that this process does not mean ignoring your blood pressure or pretending it doesn't matter. Because awareness is still valuable, but awareness without fear works very differently in the body, sending a signal of safety instead of urgency. And when safety is present, the nervous system does not rush blood through tightened vessels or accelerate the heart unnecessarily, which is why calmer monitoring often produces more accurate readings than frequent checking ever did, helping you and your doctor see what is truly happening instead of what your stress response temporarily creates. Many seniors worry that stepping back will somehow make things worse, but the opposite is often true, because reducing hyperfocus allows the body to exit a constant alert state that silently keeps pressure elevated, especially in people who are otherwise doing many things right. And when that alertness fades, circulation improves, tension releases, and the body begins cooperating instead of resisting, which is why this shift is not about control through effort, but control through understanding, giving you confidence that improvement does not require constant monitoring to exist. Over time, this calmer approach also changes how you feel emotionally about your health, because the monitor stops being something you dread and becomes just a tool, not a judge. And that emotional neutrality matters more than most people realize, since fear alone can raise blood pressure even before the cuff inflates, while neutrality allows your system to remain steady, making each reading more reflective of your true baseline rather than a momentary stress reaction. And that alone can remove much of the confusion seniors feel when numbers seem inconsistent. This is why the most meaningful progress often shows up quietly, without dramatic effort, as readings become more stable, anxiety fades, and confidence grows, not because you force change, but because you stop feeding the loop that kept your body on edge. And when that loop is interrupted gently and consistently, the nervous system recalibrates, proving that many sudden spikes are not signs of decline, but signs of a system asking for calm, not more attention. So, if your blood pressure has felt unpredictable, frustrating, or even frightening at times, remember this isn't about doing more or pushing harder. It's about stepping out of reaction and into regulation. Because once reassurance is replaced with trust and urgency is replaced with calm, the body responds in kind. And that understanding alone can bring relief, clarity, and stability, helping you move forward with confidence instead of fear, knowing that your body is capable of relearning balance when it is finally given the space to do so.